I had always thought our family reunions were an odd tradition. The Jenkins family wasn't exactly the picture of unity. Yet, every New Year, we gathered at the lakeside cabin by Silver Lake in Maine, a place steeped in uneasy memories. This year, there was a quiet desperation to our reunion. Edward Jenkins, my grandfather, had insisted we all come. I wasn't sure why I came. Maybe it was a hope of patching things up with my cousins or finding some elusive closure for fractures that ran through our family. Or maybe it was curiosity about the cabin itself. It had a certain presence, a weight in the air that grew heavier as you approached. Grandfather was in good spirits that evening, though his smiles didn't quite reach his eyes. As we sat around crackling fire, he raised a toast, his glass filled with that strange orange vanilla concoction he always favored. "To new beginnings," he said, and we all followed suit, clinking glasses and murmuring the phrase with varying degrees of enthusiasm. The first sign something was wrong came when the clock on the mantel, an old, ornate thing I'd never seen work before, suddenly chimed midnight. We all paused. It wasn't midnight yet, not for another 2 hours. "It's just old," my cousin Marie said, brushing it off. Probably the vibrations from the fire knocked something loose. But as we returned to our conversations, the clock chimed again, and again, and again. Each time, it sent a shiver through the room, louder and more resonant than it had any right to be. I caught Grandfather staring at it, his knuckles white around his glass. "What's wrong, Grandpa?" I asked. He didn't answer, just muttered something under his breath before shuffling toward the window overlooking the lake. The moonlight reflected on the surface, a still, almost glass-like mirror. But something was off. It was his reflection, or rather, what wasn't his reflection? Instead of his weathered face, I saw another man staring back, gaunt, hollow-eyed, and drenched in water. I blinked, thinking it must be a trick of the light, but when I looked again, the figure was still there, its mouth moving as though trying to speak. I turned to call out to someone, anyone, but the room seemed changed. The fire dimmed, casting the walls in flickering shadows, and the scent of orange and vanilla turned sickly sweet, cloying, like rotting fruit. The air grew colder, and then came the voice. Edward Jenkins. It was low and guttural, seeming to rise from the very foundation of the cabin. My cousins froze, their chatter dying instantly. Grandfather stumbled back from the window, his face ashen. No, it can't be," he stammered. "You're dead. You're supposed to be dead." The cabin groaned as though in agreement, the wood twisting and creaking. Then, from the corner of the room, water began to pool, spreading across the floor in thick, dark tendrils. And from it rose him, Samuel. I knew it was him without needing an introduction. His presence filled the room with an unbearable weight, a suffocating pressure that made it hard to breathe. He was soaked, his skin tinged blue as though he'd just been pulled from the icy depths of the lake. "You betrayed me, Edward," Samuel said, his voice like the scraping of ice against stone. "No, I didn't mean to." Grandfather's voice cracked. "It was a mistake." "A mistake," Samuel echoed, stepping closer. With each step, the temperature dropped, and frost began creeping up the walls. "And now you'll pay the price." Grandfather turned to us, his eyes wild. "Get out," he screamed. "All of you, get out now." We didn't need to be told twice. My cousins and I bolted for the door, but when I looked back, Samuel was upon him, his wet, icy hands wrapping around Grandfather's throat. The last thing I saw before the door slammed shut was Grandfather's body being dragged across the floor toward the lake. We made it to the car and drove until we couldn't see the cabin anymore. But the chill stayed with us. For days, I couldn't shake the image of Samuel's reflection or the sound of Grandfather's screams. The news said Grandfather had drowned, though his body was never found. The cabin was left abandoned, and none of us ever returned. But Silver Lake didn't let us forget. A year later, my cousin Marie disappeared after visiting the lake with friends. Then my uncle. Each time, the story was the same. They vanished, last seen near the water's edge. Now, as I sit here writing this, I know it's only a matter of time before it comes for me. I hear the clock chiming, even though I'm miles away from that cursed cabin. And sometimes when I catch my reflection, it's not me looking back, it's Samuel. When I first heard about Grey Hollow Asylum, it felt like the perfect subject for my debut documentary. Tucked away in the countryside of rural England, the derelict asylum carried a reputation steeped in tragedy and whispers of the supernatural. As an aspiring filmmaker, I couldn't resist. Little did I know, that decision would carve a permanent mark on my life. I arrived on a dreary morning. The sky hung low with dense clouds, and the asylum loomed ahead like a relic frozen in time. Its broken windows and ivy-covered facade gave the place an unshakable air of foreboding. My fingers trembled as I unloaded my equipment, but I told myself it was just the chill of the wind. Inside, the air was thick with decay. Dust motes danced in the faint beams of light, streaming through cracks in the boarded windows. The smell of mildew and damp earth was suffocating, but I pressed on, my camera in hand. The first few hours were uneventful. I filmed the crumbling walls, rusted bed frames, and scattered debris. There was a haunting beauty to the neglect, but nothing out of the ordinary. Then I saw them. Footprints. The prints were faint but unmistakable. A trail etched into the dust. They led down a corridor and stopped abruptly in front of a heavy metal door, sealed with rusted chains. I crouched to examine them closer, noting how fresh they seemed, as if someone had been here just moments before me. My breath quickened, but curiosity overrode caution. I followed the trail, my camera rolling, documenting every step. When I reached the sealed door, I paused. A cold breeze seemed to emanate from the cracks, carrying with it a faint scent of something metallic. Blood, perhaps? I shivered and told myself it was just my imagination. The faint sound of laughter broke my thoughts. It was distant, disjointed, like it came from several voices but blended into one. My heart raced as the laughter echoed through the empty halls. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice trembling. There was no response, only the sound of footsteps shuffling in the distance. I tried to convince myself it was another explorer, but deep down I knew better. By dusk, I stumbled upon a small office, the glass door shattered. Inside were rows of patient records scattered across the floor. Most were too damaged to read, but one file caught my eye. It belonged to a patient named Mary Liddell. She had been admitted for hysteria in 1923. The notes hinted at mistreatment, experimental therapies, isolation, even starvation. Suddenly, my camera flickered. I turned the lens toward the wall, and my blood ran cold. Written in jagged, crimson letters were the words. They knew. I staggered back, nearly dropping my camera. The letters hadn't been there moments before. My head swam with questions. Who had written it? How? The laughter returned, louder this time, echoing through every corridor like a macabre symphony. That night, I set up my camp in one of the larger rooms. I couldn't bring myself to leave. Not yet. There was something about this place, something that begged to be uncovered. As I reviewed my footage, a sudden bang echoed from down the hall. I froze. The sound was followed by the slow creak of a door. My flashlight flickered as I stepped into the corridor. My breath came in short gasps, the air colder than before. Then something pushed me, an icy, invisible force that sent my camera clattering to the floor. I spun around, but no one was there. Trembling, I picked up my camera and bolted back to my makeshift camp. That's when I saw the scratches. Underneath a rotted piece of furniture, etched deep into the wood, was a single word: justice. Sleep was impossible. Whispers filled the room, voices overlapping, crying, begging, and accusing. I pressed my hands to my ears, but they only grew louder. By dawn, I was a wreck. My hands shook as I packed my gear. Whatever truth Grey Hollow held, I wasn't ready to face it. I left that day, but the asylum didn't leave me. Back home, as I edited the footage, I noticed things I hadn't seen before. Shadows darting across the frame, faint faces in broken windows, and the word justice scrawled in places I hadn't even explored. When I released the documentary, it sparked outrage. The asylum's history of abuse and neglect became the talk of every news outlet. Former staff came forward, admitting to unspeakable acts committed under the guise of treatment. Mary Liddell's name resurfaced as a symbol of the voiceless victims. Yet, my work came at a cost. Even now, I can't escape the whispers. They follow me, growing louder in the quiet hours of the night. Sometimes, I catch fleeting glimpses of her, Mary. She stands in the corner of my room, her face pale, her eyes hollow, watching. They say justice was served, but at what price? Gray Hollow Asylum claimed more than its share of victims, and now I fear it has claimed me too.